So dear respected Thai, dear sisters, dear brothers online, so thank you to Brother Peace and Brother Generosity. We're still in lazy days here at Deer Park, and the brothers and sisters are practicing solo retreat or up in the mountain, but we decided to just continue with this class for everyone online. And the brothers just got back from camping in Arizona. And it was very hot, but we were lucky where we were camping. There was a cool river, and every day the brothers, as it got hot around maybe 10:30 or 11, everyone started to migrate from the campsite down to the river side to put their feet in the water or to hang the hammocks in the trees beside the river. And it was so cool down there. There was a current of cool air that just moved with the water down through the canyon. And later I learned that that river, it's called Oak Creek in Sedona, between Sedona and Flagstaff, Arizona, was a kind of corridor for the ancient Puebloan people who, some of them lived in sedentary settlements, like in what's called Montezuma's Castle or Tuzugut or the Verde Valley, and they moved up, decided to, for some reason in the 1400s, they decided to revert to a nomadic life, and they moved up northeast along that river. And the last day we were there, we got to hike up in those deep canyons. They call it the little Grand Canyon, the Oak Creek Canyon, and it's so beautiful. Even in the heat of Arizona, there is this verdant green valley with water seeping in from the ground water and nourishing sycamore trees and oak trees and beech trees and all kinds of beautiful flowers. Many of them that we see, some of them that we see around here, and some that I've only seen in very, very green areas. So even in the midst of the heat in the desert, there can be this kind of paradise given the right conditions. And I was reflecting on the dharma and how that is also a source of refreshment and a kind of cooling balm or a cooling submersion for us to take advantage of, to cool down our mind, which is always beset by the heat of affliction, of passion, of anger, of jealousy, of fear and despair, and how it's kind of there for us, like this beautiful valley in this canyon in Arizona is there for us. And there was a moment that I was laying in the hammock next to the river, and I was reading a recent book by our teacher called How to Connect. And in there Thai invited us to visualize an island with green plants, cool water, cool clear water, birds singing, the sun. And I looked up from the book and I saw there in the river there was an island with green plants and clear water and the birds were singing and the sunshine. And I saw that part of the practice is just learning how to recognize the beauty of the natural world outside of us, but also within us, and allow ourselves to be brought into a space of beauty. Many of us, we don't allow ourselves to go to a place of beauty, either outside or within ourselves. Somehow in the way we have set our mind, the way we've been raised, we feel we need to subject ourselves to a kind of prison, whether it's our apartment, our house, a city, a job, a career. And then we need to take a vacation in order to get just a glimpse of this beautiful nature. And that is an invitation to reflect on our life. Is it possible to arrange our life in such a way that we can enjoy the beauty of nature, even if it means just stepping outside the door of our house onto a green lawn, walking through a public garden, going to sit at the root of a tree and just feel the presence of the tree. Just it's offering us its stability, its rootedness. And we can see its joy. We can see its happiness. The tree is doing what a tree does. And it's often, I imagine, if a tree had a way we could understand its thinking, it might look at the human beings and say, why amongst all the plants and animals and fungi and bacteria does this strange animal not just enjoy its true inheritance? It is a child of the forest, a child of the streams, a child of the earth, and yet it behaves as if it's a prisoner. It builds boxes and out of metal, out of wood, and it prefers to live inside this kind of second skin that it has created for itself. Ever since it moved out of the very temperate climate in Africa, it started to make clothing a kind of second skin. And then moving farther north, experiencing the cold winters, then building shelter from the rain, from the cold. And we've become so enamored of our shelter, of our second skin, that we no longer know how to sometimes step outside and enjoy the clear water and the green plants. So from time to time, the brothers, even though we live here in this beautiful natural space of Deer Park, we also go out for a very simple vacation. But it's not really a vacation because it's very full. It's not we don't vacate, but we fill ourselves with joy of being in nature and living simply. I had just my camping hammock, and the brothers had just a tent, a sleeping bag, and a little bit of like simple canned food. And we do that because somehow we learned through the Dharma that we need to nourish the joy of nature within us and immerse ourselves in that kind of environment. And then it somehow is very easy to touch the Dhamma. Walking down here, I reflected on my own insight that the Dhamma doesn't necessarily have to be popular. It would be wonderful for those of us who practice the Dhamma, who get the healing, get to the cooling of our difficult emotions. we often we experience that, and then we wish, wow, if only everyone else could practice like that. If only we could make this dharma available. And so we become very natural kind of proselytizers. We want to teach the dharma to others, and we can't understand when they cannot receive it. And that is very interesting. The Buddha himself, he despaired of teaching the Dhamma. At some point, he just, after his awakening to the nature of the impermanent nature, the non-self nature, the unconditioned, he said, oh, people will give me so much trouble trying to teach this. What if I just enjoy my awakening and not bother myself with what he knew would be a lot of wrong perceptions and misunderstandings of the Dhamma that he teaches. And I've often reflected on that as a Dhamma teacher and as a monk, because every day the Dhamma brings me a lot of joy, and it helps me to deal with my own emotions, to embrace them. I often have the impression that living as a monk, whenever I have a difficult emotion, like some anger that comes up, if I have the feeling that if I were not a monk and a practitioner, that it would be maybe 10 times as great. That some other situation that I might be in work or in my family would come up, in my reaction would be maybe at least 10 times as strong. So it's not that we as monks and monastics and as lay practitioners, it's not that we don't have emotion. For those of us who are new, we see somebody practicing mindfulness, we think, wow, they are just so like a magical person who's mastered their mind to such a degree that they don't have any suffering. But that is not true, and that is not true for Thai. I don't believe it was true for the Buddha, and I know it's not true for me. But the difference is we know how to reduce the harm. We recognize that anger is a kind of fire that can spread very quickly. And the same is true of despair, of jealousy, of ignorance. And so as practitioners, we want to kind of minimize the fire, not let it get out of hand. And with mindfulness, shining the light on the emotion, it becomes less strong. And then we don't feel carried away by that emotion. And so that is the beauty of the Dhamma. It helps us to train our mind to reduce the suffering. And the teaching of today, the 10th tenet, focuses on 3 kinds of concentration that can help us to reduce our emotion, reduce the fire of our difficult emotion. So the 10th tenet, the basic concentrations in Sanskrit, Samādhi. Samādhi means concentration. are the concentrations on impermanence, no self, and nirvana. The unconditioned. So already in the 8th tenet, we learned about the concentrations on emptiness, signlessness, and aimlessness. And in the last class, we saw that Thich proposed that we can have 3 Dhamma seals, or 4 Dhamma seals, or 5 Dhamma seals, but they must include nirvana. So, impermanence is a Dhamma seal, no self is a Dhamma seal, and nirvana is a Dhamma seal. That means that when we see impermanence, we see the Dhamma. When we see no self, we see the Dhamma. And when we see nirvana, when we touch nirvana, then we are touching the Dhamma. So they are a quality that helps us to see when we're going in the right direction, when we're on the right path. And they are also a kind of concentration. So that means that it's not only that we see that things are impermanent, because that's not difficult for us to accept. We see things changing all the time in our body. Our breath is coming in and out. We see the sun rising and setting. We see plants growing, giving forth flowers and fruit, and then withering, the leaves falling, and eventually drying up and going back to the earth. So I don't think in my life as a monk anyone argued about the impermanent nature of things. The problem is that we live our life in such a way that we treat things as if they were permanent. And that is the point that the Buddha made. That is why we suffer. It's not because we don't suffer because things are impermanent. We suffer because we believe them to be permanent. And we live in such a way that we treat them to be permanent. So when a loved one passes away and we are devastated and we cannot believe what has happened, we've lost this person, we have to look and see, have we been practicing the concentration on impermanence in every moment of our relationship with that loved one? Can we see them with the eyes of impermanence and see that in this moment the cells in their body are being born and they are dying? We might look at our parents and see them growing older, dying, and we have memories of our parents, of good times, maybe of difficult times, and we feel a yearning inside of us to bring back those moments, to bring back that living, breathing mother or father that loved us, that cared so much for us. But with the concentration on impermanence, we can look more deeply and see that there's still a conservation of energy and matter. So impermanence does not mean that things are born and then they are completely destroyed. It means that things are always changing form. And the loved one that we so dearly miss is still there in his or her new form. Through their words, their thoughts, their actions, they have transmitted to us joy, happiness, also their suffering, their fear, their wrong perceptions. And that is no less a part of them than the physical body of our loved one. That is no less a part of them than the feeling of the hand on our arm or shoulder, caressing us when we are sick. When we look into our own hand, we can see our father or our mother there. And that is a way to cultivate the concentration on impermanence. Concentration means we maintain it over time. And the concentration always has an object. In the case of impermanence, we take as our object any phenomenon. So it could be our loved one, it could be a flower, it could be maybe a despotic government causing suffering for so many people in our country. If we believe those things to be permanent, it's almost like we try to plastify them in our minds so that they will continue to give the appearance of being permanent. And we try to maintain it, we try to keep that person just the way we think them to be. But looking more deeply, we see so much beauty in impermanence. I used to say, long live impermanence. In French, vive l'impermanence. Because with impermanence, we see that the young girl can grow up to be a beautiful woman. With impermanence, we see ourselves as practitioners, growing in our understanding, learning every day. With impermanence, we also see close ones growing old, getting sick and dying. And that is the nature of things. And going into the Dharma and taking refuge in the Dharma means that we no longer take refuge not only in our loved ones, not only in those who are most dear to us, those things that are most dear to us, but not even in our very body, not even in our very feelings. We don't see those things to be unchanging or permanent, because we know that that will lead to our grasping at something that cannot be grasped at trying to prop up or maintain something which is naturally going through its process of transformation. It is like, imagine a surfer here on the ocean near Escondido or in Oceanside, and they see the perfect wave, and they think, if only that wave could stay like that forever. If I could surf that wave forever and ever and ever, unending. Maybe that is a dream of, well, I don't know any surfer who thinks like that. Because, of course, the nature of the wave is that it is impermanent. The joy of riding the wave on your surfboard is thanks to the impermanent nature of the wave. If the wave only stayed in its form before cresting, how could we surf it? And if it didn't come crashing down and go back to crash down onto the beach and then come back down into the ocean, how could we ride the wave? Maybe we can listen to a sound of the bell. So we talk about the Bodhisattva path as riding the waves of birth and death. And sometimes some of our brothers who grew up surfing, they say, surfing the waves of birth and death. So recognizing that this body has come to be thanks to causes and conditions, and it also is of the nature to disintegrate. And that is a wonder of life. So concentration on impermanence means taking a phenomenon, say our body, as an object, and recognizing every day, our nails are growing longer, we clip them off, our skin is flaking off. The cells in our body are constantly renewing themselves. And we are actually, more properly, a process going on than a person or a self. And that is how impermanence, the concentration on impermanence, leads very naturally to the concentration on no self. So in the earlier classes we talked about impermanence as with regards to time, and no self with regards to space. So the concentration on impermanence helps us to touch deeply the nature of time. Actually, time is only a way of measuring impermanence. In the old times we had a sundial, and so the position of the sun in the sky, as it shifted, and the shadow that then was left on the sundial told us that we were no longer where we were this morning, and now we have moved on to a later time in the day. The calendar, all these ways that we think about time are really just a measurement of time. So impermanence is not a measurement, but rather it is a insight. It is an insight into the nature of things to arise and to pass away. So we learn to look with the eyes of impermanence. I remember when I was a child, and I think maybe 12, 13, and I read some kind of series of fantasy novels. And there was one character, and he was afflicted with the eyes, seeing everything with the eyes of impermanence. And so he felt he rejected, he could not feel love or care for anyone because he saw that they were already dying in his eyes. And I remember reflecting about that, and I thought, is that really the case? My father often tells this story about when I was in the car with him, I think at 8 or 9 years old. And I was just reflecting because I was I just learned about the idea of heaven. And I was very concerned about this, what I learned about heaven. Because apparently heaven is a place that you go to, and of course everything is wonderful and beautiful. But once you're there, you're stuck there, apparently forever. And I was very concerned about this because I never liked, a child, you imagine like you have to go to your room and stay there for an hour, and that's already, I had a room that's quite nice, there are many things there, but I didn't want to stay there for an hour without being able to go out. So imagine living a good life and then going to heaven and then it's like going to your room forever and ever and never being able to get out. And so this is what was going on in the mind of myself as an 8-year-old child. And so I was very anxious about this, and I asked my dad, I said, so is heaven forever? And I don't know what my dad said, but then I said, I don't think I would like such a place. How can we get out of heaven if we are there forever? So heaven is a creation of the collective consciousness for us to assuage our anxieties and fear when confronted with the situation of impermanence. Heaven is a creation of the collective consciousness that helps us assuage our fear and anxiety that arises due to the nature of impermanence that we observe in every moment. So that's something for us to reflect on, to look deeply into. All of these words, all of these concepts, whether they are part of religion, they're part of a spiritual path, part of tradition, part of what we believe, we have to recognize that in some way, shape, or form, these things have been mediated and brought to us in the collective consciousness through our ancestors, whether written down in a book, whether in oral culture, whether in art, music, whatever. And all of these things are there, hopefully, to help us to better understand our own nature. And when we encounter the Dharma, at least for some of us, for me, when I encountered the Dharma, I suddenly realized all of this, it's wonderful. I love art, poetry, music, but sometimes we want to cut right to the chase. And I feel that the Dhamma is very helpful in that way, because rather than getting infatuated about the messenger, whether it's a messenger in a religion like the Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad, or the creator of an incredible piece of music like Bach or Beethoven or Mozart, or an incredible painter, Michelangelo, or sculptor, or Da Vinci, rather than getting infatuated with the artwork, we are able to see it only as a raft that we are ready to abandon once we reach the other shore. So the same is true of these concentrations. They are some of the most tasty morsels of the Dhamma. This invitation to focus on the nature of impermanence in all phenomena. But we know that we don't need to get caught and obsessed about the Dhamma either, that it's only there to help us to get that insight, so that we don't continue to mistake things that appear to be solid and permanent as being as having the nature of permanence. We see that they also are impermanent and changing, and that it is not a good use of our time to try to accumulate or appropriate those things, even our own body. And when you do that, then suddenly heaven is right here. In the moment that you can release your grasping onto your body, your feelings, your perceptions, your mental formations, because you see that they are impermanent, and that even you have this happy, joyful feeling because you eat this food, or you listen to this music, or you watch this television program, you know that that will change, and that there's still sadness there. There's still fear, there's still anxiety. And so you learn how to take care of what you're consuming, what kind of nutriment you're taking in. Is this film, is this television program, is this piece of media on social media, post, or some person, is that helping me to water the seeds of mindfulness, concentration, and insight? Or is it watering the seeds of attachment and jealousy and FOMO? And so when we see, that nutriment is not nourishing my happiness, is not nourishing my joy, then we can let go of it. Today it was reported that Vladimir Putin said there is no happiness in life. One of the most powerful men in the world, with wealth, fame, said there is no happiness in life. And I felt very, very sad for him. He has used his power to become who he is, and he cannot touch happiness. He sees no happiness in his life. That is what was reported. I didn't talk with him myself, but he's not the first very wealthy, powerful person that I've heard who's in that situation. So somehow, even we try our whole lives just to get a little bit more, get a little bit more income, get a little bit more, better house, better job, better situation for our family. Yet we still find we are not truly happy. And studies have shown that after a certain level, when we just have our basic shelter needs met, our basic nutritional needs met, actually we don't experience much more happiness by gaining a lot of wealth and power and fame. We know that. That's scientifically proven. The Buddha said that, but now we have scientific studies which tell us the same thing. And yet we continue to run because of our need. Yeah, maybe as a child, our father or our mother praised us for something we said or did, and we crave that acceptance. And so we've conditioned ourselves to try to get that. If we're not getting it from our parents, then we need to get it from our boss, from our colleagues, from our loved ones. And we don't feel happy if we don't receive that kind of praise or acceptance. So that is where the Dhamma and the concentration on impermanence is so helpful. It helps us to release our grasping and see, what is coming up right now? If I don't have that thing, if I don't eat that food, if I don't watch that movie, if I don't check my email every 30 minutes, can I still be happy? Can I still feel joy? And you experiment. Concentration means you maintain it over time. So you observe the impermanence, but you keep that awareness over time. And so you get those eyes of impermanence, and the result is freedom. The result is letting go. The result is joy and happiness. You try it out. You try out a little bit each day, and just focus on the impermanent nature of your child. It doesn't mean that you don't love them any less. It's because you love them so deeply that you make them the object of your concentration. Seeing their impermanent nature, you want to be fully present for them in the here and now. You know that in 100 years there will be a pile of ash in the ground. But here they are, a living, breathing, beautiful child, fresh. And even if they suffer, they are there. And we want to do everything we can to be present for them. The greatest gift we can offer our loved ones is our presence. And the concentration on impermanence is a way to help us to see that. Because we forget and we think that we want to give them other things. Like a college, we work hard to make money so we can pay their tuition, so they can go to college, so they can have a successful life. But in all of that, have we been truly present for them? Have we really looked in their eyes and say, I am here for you, my child. I am here for you, my loved one, my dear. So that is something I've practiced with my father and my mother. And it brings a lot of joy to just sit down and not fall into the conditioned habit of just talking about whatever is on the news, whatever music, whatever it is, those areas that we're so used to discussing with our loved ones. You can just sit and smile and follow our breathing and look at them in the eyes and say, my dear one, or I'm here for you. And that's it. Because we see that they're impermanent. But yet here, we can be present for them. We can listen to the sound of the bell. And in this way we can live in peace and we can die in peace in any moment. Because we are of the nature to die. That is the nature of this body. But so many people die with regret. They didn't take that time to really be present for their loved one when they had a chance. And so on their deathbed, they regret. They regret the harsh words that they said, the blame, the judgment. And yet it's too late. And those words cannot be taken back so easily. So this is, so the concentration on impermanence is like a mindfulness bell, inviting us to cherish the presence of our loved one here and now, of our colleagues, of our all of those who are part of our community, wherever we are. Please take a moment, if you can, tonight, if not tomorrow morning, and sit down with the person who is so dear to us. It is natural that that person makes us more angry than anyone else. Often we don't see that. Usually if we are thinking about someone and we are upset about something they said or did, it's because we care so much about them. And likely they care equally about us. But with the eyes of impermanence, we can see that argument, that dissatisfaction is so small in the grand course of things, of life. And that is why these concentrations are so basic and so essential to the practice of an awakened life. And why Thai emphasizes them so thoroughly in the description and practices of Plum Village. So impermanence with regards to time and no self with regards to space. It means that, as we have already learned, that there's no essential something, substance, that is separate from everything else. Because of our love for the world, love for our loved ones, love for ourselves, we have put upon the world this idea that there is something that is ineffable. There is something that is cut off from all other things, which cannot be touched by the sun, the rain, the earth, the sky, the planets, the elements, everything in the universe. It is actually the insight of Nirvāṇa, of touching the unconditioned, that we mistake for a conditioned self. We feel beauty, we feel a rush in our blood, in our being, when we see beauty in nature, in our loved one, in life. But we don't recognize that beauty is impermanent, that it is unconditioned. And it is not something that we can grasp onto. But because of a wrong perception in the collective consciousness of our ancestors, we propose that there's some kind of self or essence or soul or something that is somehow permanent and not of this world, but that thing is something in itself. And so we grasp at that thing, and we start to think that our thoughts, our feelings, our perceptions, our body is somehow has this ineffable nature, and it cannot, it is not somehow, it is cut off from the rest of reality. So looking deeply into ourselves, we can observe that we are made of only non-us elements. In this body, there is the sun, there is the rain, the earth, and that is something that is not just for the sake of declaring it, but something that I try to practice in every moment. That is the concentration on no self. Concentration on no self means seeing that we are only made up of non-us elements, that this body is the coming together of the earth, the water, the energy from the sun. All these things, our father, our mother, our ancestors, the ancestral bacteria that led to eukaryotic cells that eventually joined to form complex organisms, swimming around in the oceans, eventually crawling up onto the land, and then eventually, burrowing into the earth, maybe climbing up into trees, and eventually walking upright on two legs on the earth. That is all there in this body. And this body is a continuation of that ancestral lineage. And so to somehow say that in this individual manifestation of this body is somehow something that is permanent and ineffable, untouchable. It's very strange. But it's quite natural if you see that our nature is to grasp on to our body, right? We have within us this survival instinct, just as animals and plants do. We want to find ways to protect the body. If we didn't do that, we may not be here. But through our ancestors, that life force, they called it jivita indriya. In the Buddhist tradition, indriya is like a faculty or force, and jivita is life. So that drive within us to live, to continue to live, it can get caught by a wrong perception. And so we believe that so much deeply in our will to, because we feel so strongly this will to live, then we say, well, actually that will to live within us is somehow a self. It is something that is outside of this world, that cannot be touched by things in this world. But as practitioners, when we look deeply, we can see, there's some grasping energy there. In my fear of death, my fear of transforming this body going back to the earth, these feelings changing, because we don't practice a concentration on impermanence deeply enough, then we feel fear and anxiety. And so we create a self. We create something that will somehow be permanent, that is not subject to the nature of things. And so by grasping onto that concept, that idea, the Buddha observed that he saw there's great suffering and actually a closing off, an inability to observe things as they are, which keeps us bound, actually. It keeps us in the prison of our own mind. And so by letting go of that idea, it's not that he was ideologically opposed to a soul or a self, but it's that he could not observe how the concept of a self could be held in a way that it didn't lead to some kind of ignorance or suffering. That's very important to understand. The Buddha didn't teach for the sake of just ontology, to try to describe the world, but his teaching is a kind of medicine to help us to be more free. And so the teaching on no self is not a declaration to try to counteract the philosophy, to argue with our native belief in a soul or a self of any sort. But it's an invitation for us to look deeply and see, is there something that I'm grasping onto there in my belief about a self or a soul? Some quality that I feel so inherently is me, ultimately me, and I cannot let go of it. And because of that grasping, I refuse to observe what is actually going on. So that is a deeper teaching on no self, that it is a kind of medicine to help us let go of our strongly held notions and ideas and keep our mind open and free to whatever is arising in the present moment. It's not a kind of, it's not for the sake of argument. Buddhist teachings is not for the sake of just winning arguments. If you did that, well, you could learn it and then go off and argue with anyone you like. But that doesn't mean you will become happy. And so the reason Thich emphasizes that these are concentrations is not so that we just go out and give eloquent talks or argue with people about their philosophy or belief. We have to maintain the awareness of impermanence over time, practice it in our daily life so that we can release our grasping. We need to maintain the insight of no self with regard to this body, these feelings, these perceptions, and so forth. And as well, our loved ones, and so forth. We see they are not separate from ourselves. Actually, the insight of no self, I remember growing up, and for my family, my mother, still the idea of a soul is a kind of balm that helps us to think, we will, those loved ones, my grandmother, and so forth, that she had lost in her life, that somehow we'll be reunited. But actually, when we look deeply, we see that our parents are already there in our body, in the present moment. And it is that presence that they have transmitted to us that brings us joy at that thought of being reunited with our loved ones in heaven someday. So Thich was not, it was not adequate for him to say, at this other time in the future, we will be reunited with those who we love, like his own mother. But actually, he practiced right here and right now by using the insight of impermanence and no self to see his mother in his hand. Thich, when he was sick, he would put his hand on his forehead and see that this hand is the hand of his mother. And that is a very true statement. That is not just for the sake of imagining. Because how could this hand be here without his mother and his father? And by the experience of our mother putting her hand on our forehead when we're sick as a child, we feel that. And so by just doing that, maybe you'd like to try now. You can just take your hand and put it on your forehead and relax your body and see that this is the hand of your mother, helping you to calm down, to relax. You're anxious because of a fever, some kind of sickness, and your mother comes and puts her hand on your forehead. And you feel already embraced, held, and healed. When I was sick as a child, my mother would do that, and I remember when I would get sick that I would somehow get very talkative, because I was a pretty quiet child, but somehow when I got sick, then I wanted to talk. And I realized later on when I started to practice, when I discovered the Dharma and I started practicing it, that actually the Dharma made me much more vocal because I realized that it's kind of like, it is literally that we realize that there is a sickness within us, which is a sickness of wrong perceptions. And because we don't see things, we continue to believe things are permanent, and we don't practice a concentration on impermanence because we believe things have a separate self, and we continue to believe we don't yet practice deeply the concentration on no self, and we don't touch Nirvāṇa, the unconditioned. So we continue to take refuge in conditioned things. That is a kind of sickness, a mental illness. So actually the Buddha said, now we say this person is mentally ill, And the American Psychological Association has a diagnosis for that person. But the insight of the Buddha is that mental illness is rampant everywhere. Unless we practice to understand our mind, we also are in a kind of fever every day of our life because of our wrong perceptions and our inability to touch reality as it is. And so as practitioners, it doesn't mean we are free from our illness, but it means that we get an insight, we get a kind of glimpse, kind of light that helps us to see that there's something that's not quite right in the way I'm looking at the world. And because of that, I suffer. And I found that discovering the Dharma, somehow, just as that child who wants to talk suddenly when they're sick, similarly, the Dharma helped me to say, this is the nature of things. Suddenly I have something to say. I think many of us have that experience where we discover the Dharma. We think we go through life and we're just supposed to do this and get a job there and go through university here and have a house and a family and kids, and then we think, wow, well, I did all of that, and why am I still suffering? But when we encounter the Dhamma, then it's like, wow, okay, now it makes sense. Maybe all of that advice that I had been given here and there, I didn't recognize that the people who were giving it, they also were continuing to suffer, and they are not truly happy. Vladimir Putin is a prime example, saying there is no happiness in life. Maybe those people driving us on to live this materialistic way in our life, are they truly happy? So we have to ask that question. And the last of the three basic concentrations, Nirvāṇa. So concentration on Nirvāṇa means we don't continue to take refuge in conditioned things. We see that conditioned things are impermanent. We see that they do not have a separate essential nature or self. And so seeing those two things, that and nowhere in time and space is there anything that can be grasped onto. We no longer continue to take refuge in these things. So we free our mind. We notice the grasping energy and we see what is it. We see that actually there is nothing worth grasping onto, whether recognition or title or whatever. So we have a bit easier time with this in the monastery. I think I can say pretty fairly because our life is set up in such a way that we can live, we don't have to worry about many things that many of us have to be concerned about to make sure we have a place to live and all that. So coming to a practice center is very helpful when we learn these teachings, because we have somebody who cooks for us, we have a place to sleep, and we have time and space, and we're not rushed or hurried to do anything. All we're invited to do is practice. Tai always told us, as long as you practice, then that is the main requisite for staying in the monastery. If you just practicing. So it's not enough just to come to a nice place like a monastery and just enjoy it if we don't practice. So we need to bring the concentration of impermanence into how we view the world. Bring the concentration on no self into how we see our body, how we see nature, how we see our loved ones, and also recognize the conditioned nature of things and no longer continue to grasp after or take refuge in those conditioned things, but rather let go. So the concentration on nirvana is reminding us over and over again to let go of conditioned things, so that we can realize our nature of nirvana, which is already there since beginningless time. So Thai had a phrase, we have already been nirvanized since beginningless time. We only have to wake up and see it for ourselves. So that is an invitation to bring these three concentrations into how we live our life. You might like to, tomorrow morning, when you get up in the morning, if you don't do sitting meditation, you might like to sit on your bed just for a few moments and bring to mind the concentration on impermanence. Really cherish the morning. Cherish this opportunity for a new day. 24 brand new hours are before you. You can make the commitment to live them in mindfulness and look at all beings with eyes of compassion, because seeing the impermanent nature of ourselves and others naturally brings compassion into our way of taking care of ourselves and taking care of others. Okay, it's enough for today. This is a special class, mainly just for the internet. So thank you again to Brother Min An and Brother Min Lung for helping to make this possible. And we'll continue next Wednesday with the 11th class, the 11th tenet.